Welcome to part 2 of my Marvel Animated Universe Montage. We fly into the world of Iron Man for today's video. The Iron Man cartoon was a tale of two seasons, the first season being a more light-hearted affair with Tony Stark set up with his team of Forceworks, comprising of Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, Julia Carpenter aka Spider-Woman, Sentry, and War Machine. They went up against the Mandarin, MODOK, and their team of villains including Whirlwind, Dread Knight, Hypnosha, Blacklash, and Grey Gargoyle. Other villains seen in this season was business magnate Justin Hammer and Ultimo, to name a few. It was like a mini Avengers show, but without Cap, Thor, or the Hulk. Now in the comic books, Iron Man does leave the Avengers and he goes on to form Forceworks, which they have clearly adapted for this show. It almost feels like Iron Man and Friends, and coincidentally, another famous Marvel hero had his own show with a group of friends in the 80s, and funny enough, it was through this particular show that I first became aware of Iron Man. As far as the show goes, the animation style was okay, nothing special. It was almost like a crossover from the 80s to 90s animation, but then there was that cool 3D-like transformation sequence for Iron Man. It looked like something out of the show Reboot. The series was mainly self-contained, bar two story arcs, Iron Man to the Second Power, and the origin of Iron Man. The voice acting was not the best. It had that typical dialogue which was prevalent during that time period.
The fools think your raid was a failure. But in exactly 1 year, I shall have the means to destroy Iron Man.
However, given the success of the other Marvel shows, they probably could have worked on that much better here. The person voicing War Machine sounds very familiar.
Fan out and find him.
Satellite security flagged this news transmission from Baja, California. It hasn't been cleared for broadcast.
I have an idea, Vivian. If Will is that homesick, let's send him home.
That's right, Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince voices War Machine, but only for the first 5 episodes of season 1, before veteran actor Dorian Harewood took over for the rest of the series. A little side note, Don Cheadle, who also played War Machine in the MCU movies, makes an appearance on the Fresh Prince of Belair, so that's 2 connections between Iron Man and the Fresh Prince. Then there's voice actor veteran Jim Cummins, trying his best Bill Clinton impression.
I want you to level with me. You designed, built, and own the satellite systems that control worldwide military systems and financial transactions. Isn't that right?
There was the ongoing bickering between Julia and Wanda for Tony's affections. Ultimately, he ends up with one of them. More on that later. MODOK in this series is relegated to being a sidekick, and he barely comes off as threatening when you compare him to his comic book and other cartoon appearances. Now, with all that said, I personally didn't mind season 1 of the show. It wasn't the greatest in terms of cartoon comic adaptations, but then there have been far worse. Iron Man Armored Adventures, anybody? It had a certain vibe about it that made it feel safe and entertaining, and comes with a unique kind of nostalgia for some cartoons made during that era. And given how much I was into cartoons about comic book characters, I just let all the negatives slide and I just enjoyed the show for what it was. Watching it back as an adult, it definitely comes off as corny and cheesy and hasn't really aged well. Thankfully, things were about to change. The second season saw a drastic shift in tone and animation style. The show took more of its stories from the comic books and became more serious with an edgier tone, more on par with the other 90s Marvel shows. The Mandarin is defeated in the first episode of season 2, presumed dead, but he's ultimately survived. Forceworks disbands very early on, but War Machine and Julia stay put. After a struggle with claustrophobia, Rhodes gives up the War Machine suit and sticks to ground duties, although he does return for the final episodes. The voice acting is much better this time around, and Robert Hayes does a very good job as Tony, with a different take when you compare him to Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. He's not as jovial or sarcastic, but he captures the heart and soul of the character. Dorian Harewood as Rhodey provides Tony's backbone and brings a level of strength, vulnerability, and comedy to the character which is greatly expanded on from season 1. Then there's legendary voice actress Jennifer Hale as Julia. Her portrayal here is very similar to Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts in the movies. She is still Spider-Woman, but acts more as Tony's assistant for Stark Enterprises for the majority of the second season, and ultimately ends up as his love interest. So she beat Wanda in the race for Tony's affections. The Mandarin was the main protagonist for the first season. This time around, it was a string of different villains in the second season, like Firebrand, Centurion, Crimson Dynamo. The Mandarin does return in full effect for the final after an arc is started from the first episode, where at the end of each subsequent episode that follows, he gathers his rings lost in battle in an effort to regain his power and take his revenge on Iron Man. There's also a great crossover episode with the Hulk, which was excellent, and it left you wanting more appearances from other Marvel characters.
Hulk? Banner!
Hulk, trust no one!
The action was much improved from season 1, and I felt that it had found its footing and style following an underwhelming debut season. Overall, it was a much improved season in terms of the feel of the show, the stories, and the voice acting. It was unfortunately cut short after 13 episodes, which was apparently due to the poor ratings. I really wish there had been a follow-up to this season, as there could have been appearances from Thor and Captain America, and this could have ultimately built into an Avengers series featuring the Big Four. Can you imagine if they had used a style and technique similar to the X-Men and Spider-Man for these guys? That would have been awesome. Season 2 was a vast improvement and a much more solid effort, which improved on the campiness from the first season. We can only imagine what a third season would have brought had it continued on in this vein. The show is not quite on the levels of Spider-Man or the X-Men, but as I said at the beginning, it was a tale of 2 seasons, with season 2 alone saving the show and making it a good watch. Overall, a very decent effort.